But, Mr. President, I just wanted to take a few moments to talk about the budget and what we're confronting right now here in the Congress. First of all, we all agree, I think we should all agree, that the deficits we have now are unsustainable. They are a drag on our economy. They jeopardize our future. They got to be brought under control. And I am committed to finding a bipartisan approach to try to get us through this and to have this important goal of bringing the budget under control and balanced for the future. And I might just say, Mr. President, for the last 3 decades, I'm proud that my party, the Democratic Party, has been the party of fiscal discipline and balanced budgets. Well, that may come as a shock to some people, but let's review the history. When Bill Clinton became president in 1992, he inherited, at that time, the largest deficits in U.S. history. Well, he joined with Democrats here in Congress to pass a balanced deficit reduction law that resulted in the largest surpluses in history, put us on a path by the year 2000 to completely eliminate the national debt within a decade. I was here for that. Every single Republican voted against it. Every single one. Likewise today, President Obama inherited from President Bush a deficit in excess of, are you ready for this one? $1 trillion. And a deep recession that made it even worse. Once again, we Democrats are committed to bringing this under control and to do it in a fair and balanced way. But, as a former president once said, here we go again. In December, my friends on the other side of the aisle, the Republicans, insisted we extend tax cuts largely benefiting the wealthy, adds $354 billion to the deficit this year, even more next year. Then they voted to repeal the health reform law on the House side, which would add $210 billion to the deficit over the next decade. And now these same people are shedding crocodile tears and claim to be worried about the deficit. Let's be clear. There's a right way to balance the budget, and there's a wrong way. We can balance the budget in a way that's fair, or we can do it in a way that's manifestly not fair, that will deepen the gulf between the rich and the poor and further erode the middle class in our country. H.R. 1, which I assume we'll be voting on here shortly, embodies the Republican approach to reducing deficits. Driven by ideology, it absolutely rules out any tax increase. It kind of holds the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy to be almost sacred. Instead, they take a meat axe to the essential parts of the budget, everything from cancer research to education to safety net programs for our most vulnerable citizens. Well, we've seen this movie before. You know, give tax breaks to corporations and the wealthiest people in our society, and then you balance the budget on the backs of the middle class and low income in America. These are bad priorities, they're bad policies, and they're bad values. The right way is a balanced approach. This must include spending cuts. We've made cuts in my own appropriations bill. But it also includes necessary revenue increases while making room for critical investments in education, job training, infrastructure, research, things that are essential to economic expansion and job creation in the future. We know this balanced budget approach can work because I said that's what we did in the early 1990s under President Clinton. We did both. We cut spending and we raised revenues. As I said, every Republican voted against it. But that single act of Congress and that bill signed by the President led to the largest budget surpluses and the longest economic expansion in U.S. history, created 22 million new jobs. Now, H.R. 1 that has come over from the House, their approach on how to bring the budget under control will kill jobs. Mark Zandi, top economic advisor to Senator McCain's campaign in 2008, estimates that H.R. 1 will kill some 700,000 jobs. Federal Reserve Chairman Bernanke estimates it will kill 200,000 jobs. Nobody knows for sure, but what they all agree on is it'll kill jobs. And with about 9% unemployment, a fragile economy, we're just now starting to increase employment in this country. Why would we ask to vote for a bill that we know that everyone agrees will kill hundreds of thousands of jobs? Well, you don't reduce the deficit by increasing unemployment. That's what H.R. 1 would do. It would slow economic growth, drag us back into a recession, make deficits even worse. H.R. 1 slashes the entire gamut of education programs that are so essential for keeping a ladder of opportunity for a younger generation in this country. It slashes the safety net for our most vulnerable citizens, infants and children, seniors, people with disabilities. So if you vote for H.R. 1, the House bill, you're voting to slash Title I grants to school districts by nearly $700 million. Means that 2,400 schools serving 1 million disadvantaged students could lose funding. If you vote for H.R. 1, you're voting to slash community health centers by about $1 billion. That means you would eliminate funding for 127 clinics in 38 states. If you vote for H.R. 1, you're voting to slash Head Start programs. Why would you want to take it out on kids? Why would you want to say, we got to balance the budget, so we're going after Head Start kids? But that's what it does. It eliminates services for about 218,000 children and their families next year, about a 25% reduction in Head Start. If you vote for H.R. 1, you're voting to slash child care. The Child Care and Development Block Grant would be cut by H.R. 1. If you vote for H.R. 1, you're voting to undermine Social Security. Well, people said, how does that? Social Security is not involved in H.R. 1. Well, it is in this way. We know that because of the recession, more and more people have applied for SSI, Supplemental Security Income, applied for disability, they've gone on disability, or basically they've just retired. Well, in order to take care of this huge increase in the number of people applying, you got to have people that will take the cases in, review them, make sure people are eligible, cut the checks, and get the money out. Well, that's called the Social Security Administration. Well, H.R. 1 cuts the funding for doing this $125 million below last year's funding level. That means that every American filing benefits this year will have to wait even longer. Right now, it's almost 400 and some days. That's over a year. That's over a year. Think about if you're on disability, if you're disabled, you can't work, and you filed for disability claims, and you're waiting a year and a half in order to even get your first check. Well, this H.R. 1 would cut it even more and would probably increase waiting times up to 2 years, or maybe even more than 2 years. So it really undermines the safety net of Social Security. If you vote for H.R. 1, you're voting to slash student aid. Cuts the maximum Pell Grant by $845. That's 15% below where we are now. Now you might say, well, that's not that big a deal. Well, it is. I tell senators, check with two things. Check with your private, not-for-profit schools in your states. They do a great job of educating low-income students because they were able to utilize Pell Grants plus endowments. They put them together. They do a great job in every one of our states educating really poor kids. You start taking away that Pell Grant, you lower that Pell Grant, that means a lot of poor kids won't be able to go to school. Well, that means then the private nonprofits would have to raise the tuition on other kids. That means that some of them then wouldn't be able to fall, and you start an escalator effect in our colleges. I just had the president of the University of Iowa, President Mason, in to see me today talking about one of our great universities in Iowa, the University of Iowa. And she told me, President Mason said, that cutting Pell Grant would affect probably close to 5,000 students at the University of Iowa. And sometimes this is the difference between whether they're in school or they're not in school. Or it could be the difference between a Pell Grant or they got to go out and borrow more money and take on more debt. So if you vote for H.R. 1, you're cutting student aid. If you vote for H.R. 1, you're voting to slash job training programs. The House bill that came over, H.R. 1, completely eliminates federal funding for adult training, dislocated worker assistance, and youth training programs. Completely eliminates it. These programs provide job training and reemployment services to about 8 million Americans every year. 8 million. They just do away with it. If you vote for H.R. 1, you're voting to slash the Community Services Block Grant, Well, they cut about $305 million from that provides services to some of our lowest income people and elderly. If you vote for H.R. 1, you're voting to cut investments in infrastructure, highway funding, sewer and drinking water funds, rural economic development funding, because H.R. 1 slashes community development block grants by 62%. Now, I say, go out and talk to your mayors, talk to your city council, talk to your boards of supervisors in your counties. Ask them if they could take a 62% cut in their community development block grants and what it's going to mean to them. Well, Mr. President, I can't help but also speak to my own constituents in Iowa about what this means for my own state. If H.R. 1, the House bill, which passed the House, if it were to be passed and enacted into law, well, I mentioned about the cuts that we're having in Job Corps. It would basically kill the Denison, Iowa Job Corps Center, which employs 163 people. It provides training to 450 at-risk students each year. And we have a new Job Corps Center. It's just being built, just being opened in Ottumwa. And that would probably just come to a screeching halt. And it's supposed to be opening later this year. It would shut down at least the Community Health Center in Centerville, Iowa. That's H.R. 1. H.R. 1 would, in cutting down the community services block grant, would shut down the Red Rock Community Action Agency serving Boone, Jasper, Warren, Marion, and rural Polk County. H.R. 1, as I mentioned, would completely eliminate funding for job training programs, which assisted more than 35,000 Iowans in the last year. As I mentioned, it would slash Pell Grants for our kids who go to all of our colleges in Iowa, the private non-for-profits, and our Regents institutions. 2,000 low-income Iowa kids that now attend Head Start would be cut off in Iowa. And lastly, Mr. President, it's not only just the cuts and the slashes to these vital programs, which will increase unemployment and send us back into another recession. There are riders in this bill, what we call legislative riders, that are pernicious. They do terrible damage to our country. For example, just one. There's a rider in the bill that says no money can be used or spent to continue the implementation of the health reform bill that we passed last year. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that right now, in law, because of the Affordable Care Act that we passed last year, kids can stay on their parents' policy until they're age 26. That'd be gone. The question would be, the ones that got on before this, would they be able to stay on or not? But I can tell you, no new kids would ever be allowed to stay on their parents' policy until they're age 26. We put in, and as you know right now, it's in law right now, that an insurance company cannot impose a lifetime limit on individuals now. That was in the bill last year. That'd be gone. They can start reinstituting lifetime limits and annual limits. They could also make sure that another thing that we had is we had a provision in the bill that provided for a medical loss provision. Let me try to explain that. In our bill, we said that insurers and health insurance companies have to pay at least 80 cents of every dollar of premium they collect on health care, rather than profits, bonuses, overhead, fancy buildings and corporate jets and all that kind of stuff. They had to pay 80 cents of every premium dollar has to go for health care. Done away with under H.R. 1. We could not enforce that at all. So again, for those who have seen benefits to themselves from the health care bill that we passed, whether it's keeping their kids on their policy, or elderly people now who get free mammograms and free colonoscopies and a free health checkup every year with no co-pays, no deductibles, that ends. That ends with H.R. 1. And so, Mr. President, the bill passed by the House is just, as I said, is bad policy and is bad values. It's not the values of our country. And I hope that the Senate will resoundingly defeat H.R. 1, consign it to the scrap heap of history, the history of ill-advised ideas, of ill-advised programs. Oh, there have been a lot of them that have come along in the history of this country. Fortunately, I think the Congress, in most instances, have turned them down, and we moved ahead. We can't afford to go backward, and H.R. 1 is exactly what would do. It would take this country backward, lose jobs, cut kids out of getting an education, close down Head Start centers. As I said, it would, again, widen that gulf between the rich and the poor in our country. We can't continue to go down that road. We don't want to wind up to be another third world country. We've got a few at the top and everybody at the bottom and nobody in between. It's the middle class that built this country, and we can't continue to erode the middle class in America. That's what H.R. 1 would do, erode that middle class, widen that gulf between the rich and the poor. So, Mr. President, I hope that the Senate will recognize H.R. 1 for what it is, a detriment, a body blow to our recovery efforts in America. And I hope the Senate will resoundingly defeat H.R. 1. Mr. President, I yield the floor.